Good afternoon and welcome to the Madison Programs Forum on how to make the most of a Princeton education. I'm Robert George. I am McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Building American Ideas and Institutions here at Princeton. By Princeton education, we mean a liberal arts education, or what's sometimes just called a liberal education. This is what Princeton advertises itself to the world as being. An institution that provides liberal arts education, liberal education. We, of course, have undergraduate programs in engineering and architecture, but even in those programs, we more than merely encourage our students to study a broad range of topics, to study the liberal arts. So the question naturally arises, especially for new students, how we make the most of this opportunity. And that requires us to ask such questions as, well, what is a liberal arts education? What is a liberal education? What's the point of it? What's the value of it? What's in it for the student learner? And those are the questions that we want to address today. To help us to do that, I'm delighted to welcome two of my former students back to Princeton, Solveig Lucia Gold, Class of 17, Lucia. After all these years, you would think I would know how to pronounce it. Is the Senior Fellow in Education and Society at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. She's a native New Yorker. She holds her undergraduate degree from Classics. In Classics, she was graduated summa cum laude, elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and won the Moses Taylor Pyne Prize, which is the university's highest honor, academic honor for its undergraduates. She went on from Princeton to the University of Cambridge, where she earned her MPhil with distinction and PhD in classics. Prior to joining ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, as the fellow there, she was the Thomas W. Smith postdoctoral fellow, or postdoctoral research associate here at the Madison program. She publishes in many publications, First Things Magazine, the Free Press, Classical Quarterly, Human Life Review, New York, she's been profiled in the New York Times, written for the New Criterion, and Quillette. Matthew Wilson, class of 24, is the Public Discourse Fellow at the Witherspoon Institute. He was graduated magna cum laude, of course, this past May, in political theory, where his senior thesis, which was entitled In Defense of Faithful Reasons, Challenges to Contemporary Theories of Political Justification, won the Stephen Whelan Class of 68 Senior Thesis Prize for Excellence in Constitutional Law and Political Thought. When he was an undergraduate, he, among many other activities, chaired the Honor Committee and was a peer academic advisor. So thank you, Solveig Lucia and Matthew, for joining us. If you'll indulge me, I want to begin by telling a bit of my own story because it's relevant to the topic here at hand, and then I'm going to invite Solveig and Matthew into the conversation. I was born and brought up in the heart of Appalachia in West Virginia, and I'm first generation to go to college, and my parents didn't go, my grandparents didn't go. Both of my grandfathers were coal miners. So college was a new thing in my family when I pioneered it for the family. And my parents were very keen that I and my four younger brothers, the five of us old boys, very keen that we go to college. It was very important to them. Now, why was it so important to them? I promise you they didn't have a conception of liberal learning or liberal arts education. They didn't have anything against those things. They wouldn't have had any idea what they were or what people were referring to by using those terms. No, their image of the point and purpose and goal of education, the reason that they were so keen for their sons, their children, to have it, was that they saw it as a ticket upward. That is, a ticket to a better job, more money, professional standing, higher social status. And of course that shaped my own understanding, my own vision of what it was that I was doing in going off to college. I had, for all intents and purposes, an essentially instrumental view of education. Now I went to a college, Swarthmore College, that regards itself as super focused on liberal arts learning. It too, as it happens, very unusually for a small college, has an engineering program, had and still has an engineering program. But it regarded itself above all as a liberal arts institution. So I found myself there thinking that my point in being there was to get a valuable credential and to learn some skills that would enable me to get a job with more money and higher standing than what my parents had had. And that was my vision through my freshman year and into my sophomore year. And then something happened that changed that vision for me very radically. It was very dramatic. It was like a religious conversion experience. I'm told by people who've had religious conversion experiences. I would describe it as an epiphany, and here's what happened. I was taking a course to fulfill a distribution requirement in political theory that was a survey course, where we began with Plato and we worked ourselves all the way up to the current moment at that time, to the political philosopher John Rawls, the great Harvard political philosopher John Rawls. But we were, of course, beginning with Plato. And my professor, who was a professor named Ken Sharp, assigned as our dialogue for Plato's dialogue called the Gorgias. I wonder how many in the audience have read Gorgias. Have any of you? Yeah, I see some of the graduate students and postdoctoral fellows have read it, but our undergraduates probably haven't read it yet. For reasons that will become clear when I tell the story, boy, do I hope you will read this dialogue. What's the dialogue about? Well, Plato has his hero, Socrates, arguing, as he always is doing, with people on the streets of Athens about ideas. And here they're arguing about the purpose and point of debate and discussion, what we sometimes use the fancy word dialectic to cover. What are we after when we're having these conversations, these debates, these arguments? What is this discourse that we're engaged in right now, this very moment, as we're arguing and discussing? What's the point of it? What's the purpose of it? What's it all about? Well, one possible answer to that question in the context of Athens at the time is, well, we train our young, in those days, of course, only men, we train our young men to be good orators so that they will rise or maintain their family's place in Athenian society, in the public affairs of Athens, that they will get honor and glory and standing, and that's the point of the exercise. Plato's interlocutors, Socrates' interlocutors are called the sophists. And we're told that the sophists, Solveig can correct me on this, but we're told that the sophists are people who are paid, pretty well paid, by prominent, wealthy Athenian families to teach their offspring, their young men, how to excel in argument. That is, how to win, how to prevail, so that they will be admired and honored and looked up to, and they can maintain their family's place or rise in Athenian society. And it's that viewpoint that Plato, through Socrates, wants to put on the table for us to examine. Now, I myself had never given a moment's thought to that question before reading the dialogue. And I'm only reading it because I was required to by my professor in the course. But what I found was that Plato brings us around first to seriously question it, and then in my case, to becoming persuaded that the real point of conversation, dialogue, discussion, one might even say learning, trying to get at the truth of things, is not simply instrumental purposes like rising in society or winning or maintaining one's place or showing off or being important or becoming a celebrity or anything like that. Rather, it's to get at the truth of things for the sake of the truth of things. It's knowing for the intrinsic and not merely instrumental value of knowing. I hadn't rejected that possibility previously, but I'd never thought about it. I just assumed that the purpose of what I was doing was to get ahead. After all, I'd worked very hard from when I was a very young student to achieve the things that needed to be achieved so that I could get to the next level and eventually get to a fancy college with the possibility, after getting that great credential and that training, going on to a very high-paying, high-status career. I never dreamed that that might be being a professor. I would have scoffed at the idea that there was some great value in education, and it's worth investing a lot of time and money in education just to be a teacher. I had in mind rather to be an important person, like a politician or a lawyer or a business executive, somebody who mattered in the world. But that epiphany, when I saw that Plato was right about that the real point of knowledge is not an argument, a discussion, and dialogue is not, or not merely, these instrumental goals, but it's the intrinsic enrichments of ourselves as human beings, as rational creatures, that come from learning, getting at the truth of things. What Plato teaches us in that dialogue is that truth has a kind of priority and supremacy. That we should want the truth and value the truth, even if it means that we have to give up a lot of other things, like cherished opinions we had held that turn out to be wrong, like identity-forming views we had held that we, on reflection and subjected to rational scrutiny, can no longer defend. Like giving up membership in communities that you value, where those communities are communities integrated around shared beliefs. So what Plato has on offer, and which I accepted because I was persuaded, was something scary, kind of dangerous, something costly, or at least potentially costly. And in fact, the experience made me question everything that I had believed prior to that. I suddenly began to realize that nothing I believed, or very little that I believed, did I believe because I'd actually considered the arguments on the competing sides and reasoned my way to a conclusion. I realized that most of what I believed for essentially tribal reasons, or because it was what I was brought up to believe, or it's what I thought sophisticated people were supposed to believe. Now, some of my views changed. Others of my views didn't change. Others, when I put the light of rational scrutiny on them, I held up pretty well, but not all by any means. So that experience persuaded me that although seeking professional standing and more money and social status and those things, those are not bad. It's not wrong to want those things. It's not wrong to aspire to them. They are not the fundamental point and purpose. They're not what is really the best thing on offer in a liberal arts education. The real goal is knowledge itself across the range of disciplines. Knowledge itself desired not merely as a means to an end, but for its own sake and for its transformative power. Or to use another Platonic concept, what is on offer in a liberal arts education, and it's on offer at Princeton if you look for it and go for it, is the possibility of living an examined life. Now, an examined life, again, is scary. If you're examining your life, you might not like what you see now. You might think, I've got to change some things here because I can't justify what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, how I'm living, what I'm believing. There's a cost. It's a danger because we're invested in all that. We tend to wrap our emotions pretty tightly around our convictions. We like the communities that we're acceptable in, that we're members of, in virtue of holding a certain set of beliefs, a certain set of views, and so forth. All that's at stake if you're leading an examined life, is anyone who leads an examined life realizes that he or she is fallible, and you can make mistakes. And there are mistakes that we're probably making right now. But we're comfortable with those mistakes because we don't know what they are. We may acknowledge to ourselves, yeah, I know some things I believe have to be mistaken, I can't be perfect. But we're comfortable because we don't know what they are. If we knew what they are, we might have to give them up. And giving them up might not be easy. So that's the end of my opening sermon. And my plea to you, based on my own personal experience, based on that epiphany, is to use your Princeton years, use the opportunities here, again, across the range of subjects, to pursue knowledge above all for its own sake. You can keep your ambitions, they're fine. You want to go to law school, you want to go to medical school, you want to be a business executive, you want to be a startup guy, you want to be a venture capitalist, all that's fine. But don't instrumentalize your education to those things. Use this unbelievable opportunity where somebody else is funding you for 4 years. Use this opportunity to begin leading an examined life. That'll be something, if you begin, you'll never stop. It won't end 4 years from now. You will lead your life as a person who leads an examined life. The real prize that's on offer for you, if you dedicate yourself to true liberal learning, is becoming a determined truth seeker, a courageous truth speaker, and a lifelong learner. Okay, end of my sermon. I want to turn it now over to Solveig Lucia and ask her why people should study impractical things like the impractical things you've dedicated your still young life to study.
Right, well, as you began by saying, you've chosen to come to a university that is uniquely, in many ways, not pre-professional. So when we talk about practicality, in a certain sense, no degree at Princeton is entirely practical, right? We don't have a pre-law degree, we don't have a pre-med degree. You could study anything and go on to law school or med school or business school. And that's a great blessing because it means you really can study anything and go on to those degrees. You're not expected to study something pre-professional. And I have many good friends from Princeton who have found great success in a wide range of fields who study, quote unquote, impractical subjects. Now, even those subjects that we might consider impractical, like say classics, those subjects do have great practicality in some ways. Classics, when done well, is fundamentally the study of close reading, philology, as we used to call it. And philology is applicable throughout your life, just to how you pick up any text, a newspaper article, a book you want to read for fun. And it's also practical if you're interested in, say, constitutional interpretation. Constitutional interpretation looks a lot like classical philology, at least when it's done well. So you can study something like classics and find plenty of ways to apply it across the board. Why should you study a particular, quote-unquote, impractical subject at Princeton? Well, you need to look very closely at that department. You need to look at the professors in the department, the experiences you're having in that department. And I think you really need to see if the professors themselves in a given department are able to articulate why you should study that subject. There are a lot of professors at Princeton who think there is value in studying knowledge for knowledge's sake, studying the truth. There are a lot of professors who I think are ashamed of the love they have for a particular subject and the knowledge that they loved acquiring when they themselves were students. And as a result of that shame, they have now gone out of their way to distance themselves from that love that brought them to the subject in the first place. So I hope that in your time at Princeton, you will seek out the professors who are able, as Professor George is, to articulate the beauty of studying quote-unquote impractical things, and can do that convincingly. As you walked here, you may have walked through McCosh Courtyard, over the archway, under the archway over McCosh 50. Do you know the quote there? Do you know the quote that's written in the wall? Take a look next time you walk that way. It says, here we were taught by men and Gothic towers, faith, democracy, righteousness, and love of unseen things that do not die. I think that used to be taken for granted at Princeton, that there's value in the love of unseen things that do not die. We've lost that, unfortunately, but some of us still have it. I love studying unseen things that do not die, and I love studying and examine life. And I hope you will join us in that.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question before turning over to Matthew. You and I study impractical things, but some students in liberal arts colleges like Princeton study what appear to be at least very practical things, computer science,
Sure.
Economics. But there's a way of studying even those subjects which prioritizes the play of ideas, truth, discovery, and doesn't reduce them just to their instrumental values. One of the things that I love being at Princeton for, for example, a lot of my students are economics majors. They study with me in constitutional interpretation or civil liberties, but they're economics majors. And I noticed that their approach to economics isn't just, okay, I'm going to learn this for this practical purpose. They're interested in economic ideas. Is that your own experience?
Yeah, I think you need to follow the material you're given in the way it leads you. And I think far too often, we can all be guilty of this. We approach a text, a painting, a theorem, a study, whatever it is, you approach it with an end in mind, right? You have maybe a hypothesis and you want to prove that hypothesis, and that can be a political bias, it could be a particular theory you have about economics, whatever it is. And oftentimes you set out with a very particular goal of what you want to get out of the material. I don't think that is the best way to go about studying subjects. Certainly not the best way when you're an undergrad, where really material could lead you all sorts of places. So, I am the kind of person who does not enjoy having to set out when I'm writing this, say, essay, being told, or research project, being told, okay, you need to give me an argument on day one what you're going to be writing with this research project before you've even done the research. I know why professors ask you to do that. I think it's often a mistake. Obviously, you want to have a good argument, but you may not know what that argument is until you've really done the readings and done your research. And I think it's really important to let the research guide where you go and not try to just immediately start out with a particular problem or a particular answer, rather, to the problem. Start out with the problem, maybe, but don't start out with the answer. And I think that's a way to come at a subject in a truth-seeking way and not in a answer-driven way.
So you and I both went to graduate school in Britain, you at Cambridge, I was at Oxford. And undergraduates there study a fairly narrow subject or range of subjects. From the moment you walk in the door, if you are a history major, you're a history major, you're a history concentrator. You don't take courses in chemistry, you don't take courses in even philosophy. You study history. One of the things I think is good about our system is that, at least at places like Princeton, students are required, they don't have the option of just studying one thing. They have to take a range of subjects. They learn something about the scientific method, even if they're not in the sciences.
Yes.
They have to take a certain number of courses in social science. They have to take a certain number of courses in the humanities. So there's the question, how do we choose our courses, especially the courses outside of our major field of study? And of course, here in the United States, you're at Princeton, you won't actually choose or officially choose your major course of study until second semester, sophomore year. So how do we go about it? A mistake that I made when I was a college student, again, it was simply because I didn't know any better. No one really advising me. The mistake I made was that I focused on course descriptions. I looked at the courses being offered each semester, I looked at the description, and it either sounded really interesting to me or it didn't. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. One is, you really don't know enough to know whether it's really interesting based on the course description. And there are lots of things that are really interesting that you don't know enough to know are interesting. And so if you simply rely on the course description, you're going to be very limited. I wish, and therefore I gave the advice to my own children, both of whom, as it happened, went to Princeton, but I would have given the same advice to them no matter where they went. I think the alternative is this: find out who the great professors are. Whether they are in a field that is particularly interesting to you or not. And look for opportunities to study with the best professors. Those really good professors, take my word for it, are going to make the subject matter interesting to you even if you don't begin with an interest in the subject matter. And what they will teach you, above all by modeling it, is how to think about a subject, how to explore a subject intellectually, how to wrestle with the key ideas at the heart of the subject matter. Accidentally, I ended up in college studying with a couple of great professors, only fulfilling distribution requirements, and at a small college there aren't a whole lot of courses on offer. Here you have a lot of courses on offer. I ended up in courses whose subject matter didn't particularly interest me until I took the course. And because the professor was great, I became interested in the subject matter. I can remember two of the courses in particular. One was American Foreign Policy, in which I had very little interest at the time. The other was Comparative Politics, and we were studying places like Portugal. Believe me, I wasn't all that interested in Portugal. I'm not sure I could have found it on a map. It's somewhere outside of Spain. And yet, I learned so much about how to think, how to analyze problems, in this case problems of politics, from that professor. Not only by precept, what he taught us with his words, but by the example he set. You could see him reasoning his way through material to judgments, to conclusions. So my advice, and so I got curious if you share this or what you would say about it, is to focus less on the course descriptions. Yeah, read them, of course, but find out who the great professors are. It's not a big secret around here. And we've got lots of great professors in a very wide range of fields. And see if you can, in fulfilling your distribution requirements and taking your electives and so forth, find opportunities to study with the very best. Sometimes I think the way to think about it is, think about being a student as being an apprentice. You're apprenticing your mind to great thinkers, whether in the books, whether it's Plato, Rawls, or whatever the great thinker is, but also to the professors who teach you. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. A great professor is not trying to get you to agree with him. A great professor is trying to get you how to think. If it's a subject matter, if it's a field, if it's a course in which you're studying ideas where there are conflicting opinions, whether they're political or moral, or just have to do with things like literary interpretation and things like that, a great professor is going to expose you to the best that has been thought and said on competing sides. Wherever that professor himself happens to come down is irrelevant. He's not going to try to jam that down your throat. He'll make the case for it, perhaps, but he'll make sure to expose you to the counter-arguments. The key thing is to think for yourself, but when you see that modeled in a professor, you learn how to do it. Solveig?
Yes, so you've given a great argument for why we should have distribution requirements, among other things you've said. Yeah. I want to push back a little bit, though, on the value of distribution requirements. I think the best advice I got freshman year was not to try to fulfill all my distribution requirements right away. I think a lot of freshmen get that advice and they enroll in nothing but giant lecture courses their freshman year, and as a result, they don't get much personal interaction with professors, and they don't really figure out what they love to study, because a lecture course may be a great way into a field, but oftentimes it is not, especially an introductory lecture course, is not going to be super representative of what it looks like to major in a subject. So yes, you want to take your distribution requirements, and you might find out that you really love something thanks to a distribution requirement. But don't try to just, let's say you showed up here freshman year and you don't really know what you want to study, you're interested in everything, don't think that distribution requirements are the way to figure that out. They may be, but more likely than not, they're not going to help you figure out what exactly you want to study. And instead, take a mix of things. Take some seminars, take some classes, take some lectures, take a mix of things that help you really suss out departments and meet professors in a more personal capacity.
Matthew, you've had to do this yourself very recently. What have you learned?
I think, well, I have to second what you were saying about the reputation of the professor being central to the decision to choose the course. I learned that lesson my sophomore year, I think, was when I finally decided to have the professor and the readings of the course secondarily being the two main reasons for me to take a course or not. I think when you are engaging with a professor and when you're reviewing a syllabus and when you're deciding whether to enroll or whether to stay in a class, you really ought to feel out the culture of the course, whether in the syllabus you're being made to read only certain viewpoints and not others, whether there's ideologically charged language in the syllabus that is designed implicitly to lead students toward a particular viewpoint, and also in class, on the first day and the first week of courses, whether the professor is doing hand-raising sessions to suss out who thinks what, or is beginning the precept or the class with ideologically inclined mechanisms, having students state X thing or Y thing about themselves that's not really relevant to the purpose of the course. I think all of these things need to be factors in students making decisions about their courses.
Yeah, another thing too, I think you brought up the UK and their system there where you pick a major from the second you apply to university. There are a lot of things wrong with that system. A good thing that comes out of that system is that you graduate with actual expertise in the subject you've chosen. If you study classics at Cambridge, you will graduate with a really good understanding of classical texts, classical culture across the board. A problem with the American system, and overall I think the American system is preferable, but a major problem with the American system is that you have, in a way, too much freedom to choose your classes. And even once you pick your major, you are not going to, for the most part, you're not going to have a very strict curriculum within your major. And it's going to be on you to pick out which classes within the major are most interesting to you. And that's great. I loved my Princeton education. I loved almost every single class I took at Princeton. However, when I got to graduate school, and I'm not saying, most of you in this room probably won't go to graduate school at least for a master's or PhD in the subject you're studying, but when you get to graduate school, you'll realize that actually you have very much a pretty kind of shaky, patched together understanding of your discipline. And that's okay. But I will say one thing I wish I had done better was to the extent it's possible, try to carve out a stricter curriculum within your major, because you're going to have so much freedom, even within the major.
Both of you were very active in extracurricular affairs at Princeton. Matthew, since you were so recent, I know that you were, as I mentioned, chairman of the honor committee. You were a peer counselor advisor, active in your religious community, undergraduate fellow of the Madison program. What's your advice to students about how you integrate your outside the classroom activities with the official kind of learning that goes on?
Well, first you have to put things into perspective. You have to remember the reason that you're here is to pursue knowledge for its own sake, to get a rigorous education. And that means things. There are going to be temptations, some of which are innocuous temptations. They're not necessarily bad, but eating clubs, sports teams, these things are not necessarily essential to either the function of the university or your own experience and what you are actually here to get. So I would say First, the student needs to put their priorities in order, and refining their own spiritual and academic life, I would say, needs to have a place in their determinations about what to engage in and what not to engage in. But I think for sure students need to, this is a pluralistic university. There are people of different backgrounds, commitments to varying degrees. I think it's very important it was very important to me as a student to have a community of friends with shared values that I could fall back on. But at the same time, I made an effort to not stay within that community in the sense that, to go out and meet people who I had differences with and who differed from me on varying issues, some more important, some less important, but to get out there. So I think that's also important, finding your community, but not staying within your community and not letting your community of friends on campus shield you from the rest of the university, because in a sense this is training for society, right? You're not going to be able to shield yourself in almost every case in the workplace, in the public square, from ideas or values that you disagree with. So start practicing rigorous and fair-minded engagement with people with whom you disagree while maintaining your community. I think that balance is really important to have.
I'd like you both to be very candid with me and with our audience. As a professor, what goes on in campus student life goes on behind a curtain. We don't see it. How problematic is? How serious is it? Do we have a problem at Princeton with people factionalizing, talking with only people who are like them, and constantly being reinforced in what one already believes rather than challenged? Is that an issue here, or are we pretty good about that? We mix up, and people are frequently talking to people that, a very different perspective, very different background, very different set of commitments. Which is it?
No,
or in between?
I think absolutely. Well, at least my experience as a student, when I walked into a precept, there are two prevailing attitudes, either conformism or some sort of intellectual rigidity or arrogance that I think could be derived from the students in all their social life, in their, in all of their affairs outside of the classroom, shielding themselves from any challenges, any robust challenges to their own commitments, or, as I said, conformism, just saying whatever it takes, like a sophist, to get the grade you want, etc.
Well, Solveig, I want you to talk about this as well. The polling data, including here at Princeton, says that students censor themselves. They don't say what they really think in class or outside of class, sometimes because they fear that there will be some bad social consequence or something like that. My sense is that it's not that they fear getting a bad grade from the professor. Maybe they do, you can tell me. My sense from the data is that they fear some other kind of social sanction, or just being out of touch or out of line with the prevailing opinion or something like that. What's behind what the data are telling us?
Well, look, things were different in my day, so many years ago, class of 2017. But truly, things have changed really quickly here. My extracurricular life was a cappella, glee club, triangle. I was in, the theater community, which is traditionally a pretty politically progressive community, and I, as a pretty outspoken conservative on a lot of issues, still had friends, and I was able to be in Tower, and I had a really happy social life here, and I did not feel remotely, well, with a few exceptions, I, for the most part, did not feel attacked for my beliefs ever. I know that that's not the case anymore. I mean, I suppose all of you in this audience are greater experts on this subject really than we are here, but I do understand that that's not true anymore. In terms of whether you should be censoring yourself, obviously you should not be censoring yourself. I think there's also a way to model open discourse and debate, and you have great models here at Princeton, like Professor George, and it's important to find those models. There will be upperclassmen who will help you navigate these things as well.
Matthew, you're not the, 7 years, eight years out. You're last year. What do you make of the I mean, I assume we can believe can we believe the data?
In terms of self-censorship being very high, I think so. But here, the difference between Solveig and I is she was at Princeton Princess Solveig and me was that she was at Princeton pre-2020, and I was here after 2020. My first
what
year.
Happened? COVID or what happened?
Racial unrest in society generally, about a variety of things exacerbated by probably the pandemic. But I think, 2020 was my first year at Princeton, and I think, and from what I heard in my engagements with upperclassmen, the culture on campus changed dramatically, and I don't think it's recovered since. I mean, that was the year in which you had hundreds of professors signing that now infamous letter called
July 4th.
The July 4th calling for speech restrictions, idea restrictions, the racist investigation committee for, and to see hundreds of professors at this university and scholars sign that letter, I think, was a turning point and informs the culture of the university. And we could see it, I think, among students as well. I think 2020 is really a turning point, and self-censorship was definitely an issue during my time as a student. Between the third rail issues, I would say there are third rail issues and there are non-third rail issues. Some dissent, at least, in a classroom in social settings is allowed, but, anecdotally, like for instance, a friend of mine dissenting from biological sex being a crucial factor in whether someone can participate in a women's sports team, canceled by all of her friends, pretty much. So there are third rail issues that I think a culture of self-censorship, and if you dissent, cancellation definitely prevails here. So.
But the culture is also what you make it, and courage can be contagious when modeled appropriately. That's why I point to the models you'll have around you. I'm not telling you to go out there and pick every battle. You should pick the battles that are important to you. And as a freshman, I think it's also important to have. I mean, throughout your life, it's important to have, but especially as a freshman, it's important to have a measure of humility and recognize, that this is an institution that you have to get to learn before you start to criticize it too much. But I think, you should, basically, yes, courage is contagious, cowardice is contagious, and you should find ways to model courage in the correct way so that you can inspire your classmates to speak up to. And I certainly found that to be the case when I was a student.
It's that perennial balance. It's that perennial balance between prudence and principle, deciding when to weigh in, deciding when to stand up for what's right, and not compromising your principles, but at the same time, deciding when it's not your battle to fight necessarily.
Let me invite now questions and comments from the audience. I just want to make my own comment on what Matthew and Solveig just said. The success of the university's educational enterprise as a liberal arts institution, as an institution of liberal learning, depends on a number of things, including, indispensably, the willingness of students to speak their minds in conversations and precepts and seminars. It really does. So I think I'd go a step further. I may be dating myself here than my young conversation partners here, and say that students have a responsibility to not self-censor. They have a responsibility to speak their minds. We cannot do preceptorial education. We cannot run seminars if people are unwilling to speak out, explore ideas, play devil's advocate. So in my view, it's not optional. If you sign up to come to Princeton, you want the benefits and advantages of the Princeton education, you've got to contribute to making that education happen. You have an indispensable role. It's not something we on the faculty can pour into your heads. You've got to participate. Okay, end of sermon, and let's see who would like to weigh in here. Yeah, back here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I'm a senior, so maybe I can salvage my education yet.
You got a year.
A question for me that I'd like to bring it back to the sophists and the study of rhetoric. At my time at Princeton, I happily have mastered the craft of office hours and the language of precept, and I think I've gotten pretty good at it, and my grades have reflected that. But I worry that in my inelegance in my earlier years, there was an authenticity that I've lost over time. And I worry that I've become concerned with making a compelling point rather than a right point. And I ask, what's your advice on walking back those steps for me and maintaining that truth-seeking mission for the younger students here?
The measure of self-knowledge that you just exemplified, the critical perspective on yourself that you have just embodied, your concern about where you've gone in virtue of what you've learned and the skills you've acquired makes me not very worried about you. But I think it's just a question then of disciplining yourself by remembering in the moment the concerns that you just expressed. So in the moment in your precepts, in the moment in your seminars, in the moment even in your dorm room and the dining hall sessions, reminding yourself, I'm not here to show off. I'm not here to look good. I'm not here to impress. I want to get at the truth of things. I'm going to render myself a little bit vulnerable here. I'm going to try out an argument that I'm not sure about. I'm going to question something that other people might think shouldn't be questioned. I'm going to raise issues that might take some courage. That's my advice, but I don't think that's going to be a problem for you, because you just stood up in a public forum and showed me what you're made of. Any other advice for our friend?
Yeah, I think the most authentic form of speech comes in writing. So I think, if you're worried in your life generally, whether you've developed a particular way of using language, I think see how you are in writing, and usually the better you know a subject, the clearer you can write about it. And I do think some of the jargon we pick up through academic discourse is actually masking the fact that we're not getting to the core of the issue. We're not truth-seeking. We're stopping at some of the language of the jargon we've been given. So see if you can, if you really want to know whether you know something, see if you can put it in the simplest possible language such that, your cousin who has never been to college could understand it as well.
I also think it's important to, conduct from time to time an examination of conscience of sorts and evaluate, whether for everyone, whether you are pretending to believe things that you don't actually believe beyond just playing devil's advocate, whether you're presenting yourself as someone you're not in order to please a professor, in order to please your peers, in order to procure something or other. And if, in that examination of conscience you find you are, you can course correct.
Very good, thank you. Next question or comment? Yes, was that a hand going up? Or no, you just adjusting your glasses. Who has a comment or question?
I have a question for Matthew.
Yeah, please.
Do you really think extracurriculars are not essential to function in university?
Well, it depends what the extracurricular is. Their religious life is extremely important. But a poker club is not necessarily the same importance, I think. But no, I don't think so. Not essential to the function of the university, and not essential, to the well-being and of the student insofar as what they're here to achieve.
What about the student orchestra?
I think a university would still be a university without an orchestra.
Okay. A good university in Finland?
I don't know. Does MIT have an orchestra? I'm sure. My point is just that it would still be a university, and it could still achieve primary functions of the university without more secondary extracurricular activities. or an orchestra, or a band, or a football team. As much as I like college football, it's not essential.
Does this square with what either of you or both of you think? Some extracurricular activities are purely recreational, but recreation is important at a university. In the same way that beauty is important at a university. That's why Oxford and Cambridge, at least in the old days, built beautiful buildings. It's why we should be building more beautiful buildings, more beautiful than the ones we are.
Really?
It's still a university, even if it's all ugly buildings. But it makes a university better. It's better that students are surrounded by beauty. I would say the same thing, that it's less important what the particular recreational opportunities are, but you do need recreation. Now, there are other things like religious activity that really integrate into the mission of the university, because they're about belief, they're about thinking, they're about...
Could you have a university without any religious life? Presumably, yes.
Yeah, you could, but students they would just do off-campus religious things, and there would be fewer opportunities to integrate that part of their lives with their learning.
And I think
that's in a way that you just can't do that with football or poetry club.
I think it would inhibit learning to a degree, actually, if there was no religious life, because insofar as we understand the religion and participating in religion was raising and answering to existential questions, well, in your pursuit of knowledge, you're raising and answering the more immediate questions, which can lead into more existential ones. So I think knowledge can certainly lead to raising of religious questions, and then a student or anyone wanting to get more into religious life. So,
if what I'm advocating is correct about liberal arts, what liberal arts education is and what it's for, then another way of saying what I've been saying is that it pertains to soul graft. The object is the soul, it's the examined life. That's obviously connected to...
And you know what Plato thought you needed for soulcraft? Good music.
Good music, that is true. And you need recreation.
And a football team.
And you need recreation, but it matters less what the particulars are, it seems to me.
Yeah,
Professor Keyes.
Hi, so I'm very new to Princeton. I'm Mary Keyes, I'm from Notre Dame, and I'm a fellow this year at the Madison program. So I'm really happy to get to know more about the Princeton liberal arts education. And I guess one question I have is for the students or for our panelists is from John Henry Newman's book, The Idea of a University. He speaks about undergraduate education as a chance to develop a mastery in one particular subject area that we've heard, people from classics or from political science, so it could be chemistry, it could be physics. And then at the same time to pursue classes and studies that allow one to integrate that, so to have a distribution requirement, you could say, or to learn something about a number of fields. And then, but to find some subjects that can help one to integrate what one's learned across one's education. So he speaks especially about philosophy and theology, but I wonder how thinking about integrating one's life and also trying to see sort of the deepest meaning or the value of the different subjects one's studying. How does one pursue that? I think you've already mentioned some things like religious life, or Professor George spoke about a philosophy text, a key philosophy text that just helped him put his whole education on the track he wanted. That was the best track. But I wondered how the integration and the transcendence, how that plays out at Princeton, how it can play out.
Well, Professor Keyes, that's a wonderful and very important question. And the answer to that question is that for most of my I'm entering my 40th year now, so most of my 39 years so far, at Princeton, we have not done a good job there. We've been good at a whole lot of things, and there are great professors here. And professors you should go out of your way to study with, even if you're not particularly interested in their fields. But we are not good, haven't been good at the integration side of things. And that's true of a lot of universities. Not Notre Dame, interestingly. And you have your program in liberal studies and so forth. And a lot of small colleges do better than we do when it comes to integration for reasons that we could get into. It's harder at a university like Princeton. But I think we're starting to make some progress in the same way that some of our peer institutions are, and that is by trying to offer, often team-taught, integration courses. And let me recommend, I'm going to give you a concrete recommendation. Professor Bushak, Laura Bushak, in the philosophy department is now offering a course that is basically devoted to the kind of integration of learning that Professor Keyes has just mentioned. I think it had an enrollment of 80 or 85 when it was taught for the first time last semester. I believe that Professor Schicknell also teaches from the religion department, teaches in that course. I think it is team taught. And my understanding is she's going to be teaching it again in the spring. So if you didn't take it last time, you have an opportunity to take it this time. But that's an example of people at Princeton noticing, you know what, we offer a lot of good courses, a lot of strong liberal arts courses, but nothing that tries to integrate knowledge. Well, there's at least a first step toward doing it. But we need to do a lot more. Do you have any comments on this, Solveig, you in particular, I think?
Well, I absolutely second the team-taught courses. I took a number of those, and they were among the best classes I took at Princeton. Sometimes they're graduate seminars. When you're an upperclassman, you have the opportunity to take graduate seminars, and you should jump at that opportunity. I'm afraid a lot of classes that shouldn't be integrated classes have become integrated classes, in the sense you're talking about, because they are, using, let's say, classics for political progressive activism. So there's a form of integrating,
No, that's not, that's hijacking, that's not integrating. What Professor Bushak has in mind is not an agenda of telling what to think or anything.
Yes.
It really is saying, okay, how does what we study over here in literature, how does that relate to issues historically, even in things like the sciences, the Galileo case or whatever it is. That's the kind, I think this is what Trustees is talking about.
Oh, I know that's what you're talking about. I'm saying, that unfortunately, the idea does exist at Princeton.
So do you think that's for people who do that kind of thing, they see it as a kind of integration?
Absolutely.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't realize that.
I'm so glad Professor Keyes brought up the idea of a university, because I think, if I'm paraphrasing John Ingram right, he says that the soul of a university is the values that it inculcates within its students. And if Princeton or any other university is fostering intellectual arrogance or the pure instrumentalization of education that students think, the soul is dead for the university.
Well, yeah, exactly. If Newman's right, if I'm right, it really is about soul graph. It's about who we are, what kinds of persons we are going to be, what we're going to consider worthwhile in our lives. Are we going to focus on the things that matter, but really at the end of the day, not all that much, like wealth and power and fame and celebrity, and it can be influence and status and so forth. Or the things that really matter because they're not merely means to other ends. They're things that are worthwhile for their own sake: friendship, family, knowledge, faith, honesty, integrity, decency. Things that you don't need to justify by what they get you. They're justified by what they make you. And with that, let me thank my panelists, my fellow panelists, and thank all of you for coming, the Madison program staff for putting this together. Go out and lead and examine life and take advantage, full advantage of everything that this really wonderful university has to offer you. Thank you.